I'm ready. What?
You're not sitting down and relaxing.
Hold on. Hold on. I need to get this perfect. Then. Yes. Stupid. Come on. Hold on. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Now let me get comfortable.
Do you just love this book that I bought?
Yes. I just want it. I would just want you to. I just want to record it. One to post it. But number two, it's well, most importantly,
Yeah.
to So if I ever want to just listen to you talk or just listen to you read a story, then I can.
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay, good. Never mind.
Are you set?
Yes. Pop. You ready?
Are you set?
Okay. Begin.
Long ago, I built a small log cabin in the northwestern corner of Manitoba, Canada. Every so often, I find two youngsters willing to capture the experience of a lifetime by living there for an extended period of time. I help them finance the expedition, and they, in turn, pay me back by living on an adventure I could not experience myself. The cabin is located 200 miles from the nearest town, and at some points on the compass, 1,000 miles away from the nearest human. It is only accessible by bush plane. Once a crew is in the bush, I usually fly in once every 4 months to resupply them and make sure they're in good health. It's also a good excuse to escape to the cabin I love. I had sent two young men up for a 1-year expedition, and I had checked on them twice. It was now nearing Christmas time, and I was on my way to take them out of the bush and back into the civilized world. It was a trip that I had looked forward to with great anticipation. However, it resulted in my own worst nightmare. The sound of a single-engine beaver rang in my ears as I watched the land of the little sticks pass beneath its skis. The temperature had plummeted to 40 below that day, and the thought of a hot cup of coffee in a toasty log cabin warmed my soul. I had so much to tell those guys about the world they had left behind. My heart began to pound in my throat when I saw the almighty Churchill River. I knew I was getting closer. It had always been an exciting moment to fly low over the cabin, and to see two weathered woodmen come up running out with their faces full of smiles, their arms waving. Exciting indeed and relieving, for I knew at the moment they were alive and well. The thought of no one coming out of the cabin scared me more than anything, but it was the chance one took, and I had great faith in the crews that I had sent up in the past. Soon we were flying over the Smith River, and in the distance I could see the bend on which the cabin was located. I pointed out to the pilot, and he aimed one of the nose of the plane straight down towards the cabin. But something was wrong. No smoke was visible from the cabin's stovepipe. As we drew nearer, the nightmare became a reality. Not a single sign of life was present. No tracks to the river, no smoke from the pipe, no firewood cuttings, nothing. I had the pilot buzz the cabin as low as he could. No one came out. The pounding of my heart increased with every beat. We flew up to the drop-off point, 1 mile upstream, and the pilot gently brought the plane down. I can't wait for your engines. I can't wait for you, or the engines will freeze up. Do you want to stay or go? Pick us up in 1 week, I replied. I used us simply because I refused to believe anything had gone wrong. I simply pulled my gear out onto the bank and watched the airplane disappear onto the empty Arctic sky. Quickly, I strapped on my snowshoes and headed downstream towards the cabin, stumbling from time to time, intoxicated with the fear. Finally, through the dense black spruce, I could make out the roof of the cabin. To my ears, the footsteps were silent, and the wind, though blowing briskly, made no sound. I could hear was the beating of my heart. There was no sign of life whatsoever. None. The front door of the cabin was wide open. I stepped in. I struck a wooden match upon the surface of the cast-iron wood stove. The room flooded with a fiery flash, and my sight returned from a state of total blindness. I lit a small kerosene lamp. Through the dim lamplight, I could see both chairs were overturned. Pots and pans were all over the floor. The stovepipe was disconnected, and the ladder to the sleeping loft was broken. I picked up one chair and placed it on the small table. After starting a fire, I sat by the stove in a state of shock. I assumed I had lost 2 very good friends. It was from this point that I noticed Scott's closed journal on the floor, along with some other fallen books. In haste and desperation, I grabbed the journal and began to read, hoping to find some clues. This is what it said. October 15th, 1991. I awakened in the middle of the night, for reasons unknown. I was having a difficult time falling back to sleep when I first heard it. There was a knock at the door. 3 times in a slow, steady progression. I knew it couldn't possibly be a human. There's no one within 200 miles of here. I awakened Dave to see if he had heard anything. Yet he heard nothing. Perhaps it was a figment of my rather creative imagination, but I could have sworn I heard a knock at the door. He continued on with the day's events and weather documentation, but said nothing more about the knock until 2 days later. October 17th, 1991. Well, Dave and I are up in the loft right now. Dave is almost asleep and I'm catching up on my journal entries. The day's been great. Got a lot of firewood cut and started building the new table beneath the east window. Also went hunting and got a few ptarmigan for dinner. So dinner was exceptionally good. Dave and I are going to head up to... I just heard that knock again. Dave didn't believe me when I told him I heard it 2 nights ago, but now he hears it too. I flipped the next pages, but there was nothing more to read. That was Scott's last journal entry. Jumping up from my chair, I began searching Dave's journal. Tearing the cabin apart as I looked, after a great deal of difficulty, I found it up in the loft. The journal was wrinkled and it appeared as though it had been through a battle. I found it face down, open to the last date, October 19th, 1991. I read, even though the writing was shaky and nearly illegible. October 19th, 1991. Scott has not returned since the night before last. He offered to check out the knock since I was nearly asleep. He went downstairs with the gun, opened the door, but never came back. There was no sound, no scream, no nothing. It was almost as if he was swallowed by the night of the black spruce trees. I spent all of yesterday and part of today searching for him, but I have not found so much as a clue. I'm in a loft right now. It's in the middle of the afternoon. I did not sleep last night because I too heard the knock. 3 knocks in slow, steady progression, just as Scott and I had heard the night before. I'm afraid and alone. My partner's gone. I have no choice but to stay here for 2.5 more months. To stay here with whatever has been haunting us. I'm going outside to try to find whatever did this. I just pray that I'm back to document the events tomorrow. If there's no more writing in this journal from this point, then my advice to you, whomever you may be, is to get the hell out of here as fast as you can. Chances are you'd be better off you were. That was it. The rest of the journal was blank. David never finished what he was attempting to write. I leaned my head against the wall, and in the dim lamplight, I saw 8 scratches running down the floorboards. I also saw a loaded rifle with a hammer back in the far corner of the loft. Whatever had been knocking at the door didn't wait for Dave to finish his journal entry, nor did it wait for him to come outside. Instead, it came in and got him, dragging him, causing him to claw the very floorboards in an attempt to escape and save his own life. My fear intensified. The thought of those guys having been killed was devastating. The thought of what killed them was even more terrifying. Yet, I was also on the menu. I could feel it. By then the sun had set. I couldn't eat anything, for I was nauseous. Instead, I loaded my rifle, sat in the loft, too terrified to move. The night dragged on. Eventually the fire burned out, yet I didn't risk going downstairs to feed it. I simply sat shivering in my sleeping bag, waiting for the dark night to fade into day. Morning came, and with the singing of whiskey jacks and the fighting of martins, the sky was clear and the temperature was cold. Soon I had the fire going and coffee was boiling on the top of the stove. I was still in somewhat of a state of shock, so I didn't even notice the coffee boiling over. Quickly I grabbed the pot off the stove and shaking hands poured myself a cup. Day was fine, progressed slowly as the night, and my fear grew with each passing moment I was there. I spent the day cutting firewood and reopening the ace hole. I was looking for clues and I was looking over my shoulder. Soon darkness fell upon the Arctic, and once again I sat in my loft in my cabin, awake with a fearful anticipation of the night. My eyes were wide, my knuckles were white, and my finger remained poised on the trigger. Suddenly, without warning, something jumped in the far corner of the loft. Before I knew it, the rifle was jumping in my hands, emitting spears of sparks and splitting the roof logs with each and every shot. When the smoke cleared, I saw the culprit. Although I hardly believed it was possible for a creature to kill 2 grown men, what I believed to be a horrid beast was nothing more than a small squirrel, seeking the warmth and comfort of my cabin. Instead, he received 6 rounds from a level-action 30-30. He was now a permanent part of the cabin's floor. Let that be a lesson to ya! I shouted at the walls of the cabin in empty black holes. Anything that moves within my sight will die within a sight as well. So help me God. Outside, the wind took a deep breath, causing the tree limbs to release their grip of the snow which they so desperately clung. The wind lazily exhaled in a way that made me realize that my fear was no importance of her. Whether I lived or died was no concern. After all, this is big country, and up here, there are no corners to which to back into. A man can run, but you can never hide. The next 4 days followed the same pattern. Each day my fear grew to the point where I was too terrified to accomplish anything. Each new sound that echoed from the black spruce forest provoked a fear in me that I cannot explain. Each new night became a gamble, a game of Russian roulette. I never knew on which night I would fear the knock at my door. I never knew if I would live to see the night of tomorrow. Finally, it was my last night in the cabin. Tomorrow the bush plane would come and take me on my nightmare. I climbed to the loft of the cabin, zipped myself in my sleeping bag, laying the gun over my lap. I remember giving the boys a quote by the famous woodman Calvin Rutsham, who said, "An absolute wilderness is a place where you can yell your head off for help and no one will hear you." I knew that I was in such a place. I was defenseless, helpless, completely my own. Never before I felt such a fear as that. Outside, the winds rose and fell as the night were breathing once again. My eyelids were becoming heavy, and I could no longer fight the sleep I've been avoiding for the past week. For the first time since my arrival, I was in a deep sleep. Thus the bush plane filled me with hope. Morning came bright and cold. I started the fire and set the coffee to boil. I was overwhelmed knowing the bush plane would be arriving today, take me out of the bush and out of this living hell. I was preparing to fry some back bacon when suddenly there came a knock.
Careful, because you're gonna knock over my
I bolted upright in my sleeping bag. clutching my rifle and swearing profusely. The morning had been just a dream. It took me several minutes to grab my catch and release the white-knuckled grip I had on the gun. I must have been asleep quite for some time, for I noticed that the moon was nearly at the western horizon. I laid down and closed my eyes, listening to my own heart. It was almost as if it fed off my...
Huh?
My heart pounded. It was between the stage of being asleep and awake when I heard it. 3 times in a slow, steady progression, just as the journals had said. Yet this time it was no dream. Knock. 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 My throat went dry. The noise didn't recur for several minutes. Then it was again. Knock. 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 I sat in silence for an eternity. My back wedged up against the wall, and my gun barrel was aimed at the top of the ladder. Even in the freezing temperatures, my face was beaded with sweat. I didn't move from that spot for the rest of the night. Nothing else happened. I watched the sun come up to the tops of the spruce trees. Beams of light came through the frosted windows, illuminating the cabin in the cold light. Quickly, I packed my bags along with the boys' journals and headed toward the top drop-off point, recalling the pilot telling me he'd be there in the early afternoon, and that I should be ready and waiting. I was ready to stay at the least. I arrived at the drop-off point at 1 p.m. My ears strained, listening, trying desperately to hear the plane. I looked around. Was it getting late, or was I paranoid? Where was my flight? Finally, in the cold air, clean air, I could hear the drone of the engines getting closer. 2 more hours I waited, yet my plane never came. It happened before the past. This was a time of desperation. Due to the fact that my pilot was a freelance flyer, no one else would know where I was. I hiked back to the cabin for another night in indescribable fear. I arrived at the cabin past dusk. The sky was fire with the vibrant reds and oranges. I relit the stove and set some coffee to boil on the stovetop. I also lit all the lanterns and began to read, trying to fool myself into believing I was no longer afraid. Eventually, I climbed into the loft with my gun and extra shells. I could hear the wind licking the treetops and my heart pounding with fearful anticipation. Once again, I wedged myself in the corner of the loft, poised with a gun, ready to kill anything that moved. My fearful anticipation was short-lived. 2 hours after I had climbed into the loft, I heard the knock 3 times. Knock. 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 I held the rifle to my chest and closed my eyes, hoping this thing would go away as it had done before, but it didn't. Instead, I heard the hinges of the cabin's front door squeak open, slowly, and then for a brief moment they paused, and then they squeaked once more until the door met the wall. The front door was now wide open, and the creature was in my cabin. I jumped up screaming in utter terror for my life, and began firing through the floorboards at whatever was beneath me. Finally, I heard the old wooden door creak upon its rusty hinges until it was shut. The creature escaped, and from the sound of its patient exit, it escaped unharmed. My fear increased its intensity. I was too afraid to go below, so I hid in my sleeping bag, overcome with exhaustion. I awoke the following morning, still immersed in fear. For 3 hours I was still deaf to all sounds, blind to all sights, and numb to all feeling. It was almost as if someone had shut down all my senses. The only thing I do remember is finally snapping out of my state of unconsciousness. I turned my fear into rage. I was angry because the thing hadn't put me out of my misery, like it had before. It was almost as if it fed off my fear, if I could taste it, as if it enjoyed it. I reloaded my gun and climbed down the ladder. The moment my feet hit the unlevel wooden floorboards, I heard a knock at the door. Knock. 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 A rush of adrenaline overpowered me, and without second thoughts, I opened fire at the front door. 6 shots I fired from the hip, screaming wildly as I pulled the trigger. When the smoke cleared, I heard the thing drop heavily to the floor. Quickly, I reloaded my gun, stepped on the door. I took one deep breath, pulled the hammer back on the rifle, and kicked open the door. There in the snow lay the bush pilot with his blood pouring out of the holes in his chest. His face was plated with the struggle of his final breath His eyes were all wide open. It was at that moment I realized that I had just condemned myself to a life sentence in a living nightmare. Off in the distance, I heard the laugh echo throughout the broad spruce forest, and soon after, the sun fell through the gaping jaws of the horizon.
I would have just flown the plane myself.
He didn't know how to fly. He didn't have the plane.
Huh?
He didn't have the... Oh, it left the guy there, dead?
Yeah.
Huh? Can you turn off your...
Oh, jeez.